Jack Nicklaus is the most powerful voice in golf. Brian Rolapp is the NFL executive brought in to save the business. They stood in the same room at Muirfield Village during the Memorial Tournament press conference in June 2026. One spoke, the other froze. That moment wasn't just awkward, it was a declaration of war, and the golf world is still trying to figure out exactly what happened inside that room. Rolapp had been CEO for less than a year. He came from the NFL, carrying spreadsheets and media rights deals. He openly admitted he wouldn't be overly beholden to history. For purists, that was a red flag. For Jack Nicklaus, it was an invitation. But what happened next wasn't a polite disagreement. It was something far more brutal. Jack stood up, looked at the new boss, and said words that left Rolapp completely speechless. Yet those words were only the final blow. The real battle had been building for months, and the schedule that started it all was still a secret to most fans. Now, before we get to those exact words, and we will, you need to understand why Jack was so furious. This wasn't about one comment. It was about a 200-page strategy document Rolapp had been quietly rolling out. A document that threatened to tear apart the PGA Tour's very structure. To understand Jack's fury, you have to go back to 1968. That was the year Jack Nicklaus, Arnold Palmer, and Gardner Dickinson broke away from the PGA of America to form the modern PGA Tour. They were fighting for players' rights, for autonomy, for fair treatment, for the freedom to control their own careers. Jack didn't just play on the tour, he helped build it. He bled for it. Now, nearly 60 years later, he was watching an outsider with an NFL playbook dismantle that legacy. And he had stayed silent for months, biting his tongue, waiting for the right moment. What Jack saw in that document was so alarming he broke his silence. But the worst part wasn't the plan itself. It was who Rolapp had chosen to ignore. That hidden threat sat in a leather-bound folder on Rolapp's desk. But here's the problem. Rolapp never asked Jack Nicklaus what he thought about it. Rolapp arrived with a reputation for brilliance. He'd negotiated billion-dollar NFL deals. In early 2026, during his first major interview as PGA Tour CEO, he said something that made traditionalists choke. He said he wouldn't be overly beholden to history. Translation, he cared about revenue, not tradition. Jack heard those words and stayed quiet for months. He watched Rolapp shuffle pieces around the chessboard. He watched the new CEO meet with sponsors, broadcasters, and top players. But Jack noticed something strange. Rolapp never met with the rank-and-file members, the guys who grind every week and made the tour what it is. Rolapp's orbit was the boardroom. Jack's orbit was the locker room. And that disconnect was the root of the coming explosion. That omission was a ticking bomb, because Jack knew those grinders would be the first to suffer when Rolapp's real plan came to light. Rolapp saw golf as a product. Jack saw it as a family. Those two visions were on a collision course. Then came the schedule. Rolapp's team floated ideas, compress the big events, pack them tighter, create an elite track for superstars, and a second-tier track for everyone else. On paper, it looked efficient. More star power in fewer weeks. Bigger ratings, bigger checks. But Jack knew what that really meant. He'd seen this movie before. In the 1960s, the old guard tried to control the players, and Jack helped break away to form the modern PGA Tour. History was repeating itself, but now the control came from a suit with an NFL playbook. And there was another pressure: Live Golf. The Saudi-backed league had been poaching top players, forcing the tour to respond. Rolapp's plan was meant to compete, to make the tour so valuable that players wouldn't leave. But in chasing that fight, Rolapp was sacrificing the tour's soul. And Jack had been watching it all, biting his tongue, waiting. But the moment he chose to speak would be at his own tournament, on his own grass, with every journalist watching. That moment came at Muirfield Village. He finally let loose. What he said wasn't just criticism, it was a public execution of Rolapp's entire strategy. But to understand why Jack's words hit so hard, you have to know exactly what Rolapp was trying to do. What was in that plan, and why did Jack hate it so much? The answer would expose a fault line that could split the tour in two. Rolapp's plan had a name: the two-track system. Starting in 2028, the tour would split. Track 1 for the elite, the biggest names, biggest draws, biggest paychecks. Track 2 for everyone else, the grinders, rookies, guys fighting to keep their cards. To qualify for Track 1, you had to earn it. Performance-based, meritocracy. On the surface, that sounds fair. Best against best. More exciting golf, better ratings, more money. But here's what the plan didn't say. Track 1 tournaments would have smaller fields, fewer spots for the rank and file. Middle-tier events, on the schedule for decades, would become second class. Sponsors would pay less. Prize money would drop. The non-elite would scramble for scraps. Jack knew this because he'd lived it. In his era, the tour was open. Any player could show up, compete, and win. That openness created legends. That openness built the sport. Rolapp's plan would close that door forever. That was bad enough. But then Rolapp pushed the accelerator, and the 2027 schedule became a nightmare Jack couldn't ignore. Before the two-track system even launched, Rolapp tested the concept. Compress the schedule. Pack the biggest events into the tightest window. His team proposed 4 signature events crammed into just 5 weeks, all right before the Masters. 4 massive tournaments: Pebble Beach, Los Angeles, Bay Hill, the Players' Championship, stacked like planes waiting for takeoff. Players couldn't play all of them. Sponsors couldn't get the stars. Fans couldn't track who was playing where. Think about what that means for a tournament like the Cognizant Classic. It sits right in the middle of that gauntlet. The stars skip it. The TV ratings drop. The sponsors get nervous. The event eventually dies. That's not speculation. That's math. Rolapp saw efficiency. Jack saw the death of everything he'd built, and he had the numbers to prove it. Rolapp saw a concentrated product that would force broadcasters to pay top dollar. The NFL model: every game matters, the schedule is tight, the product is controlled. But the NFL has 32 teams and 17 games. Golf has hundreds of players and 40-plus events. You can't force a square peg into a round hole. The tour's strength has always been its variety, its accessibility, its unpredictability. Rolapp was trading that for a predictable, packaged, broadcast-friendly product. Jack saw something else entirely: the death of everything he'd built. The 2027 schedule wasn't just aggressive, it was destructive. Jack had studied it for months. He'd watched early versions leak. He'd heard whispers from terrified players. He stayed silent. But silence had a limit. That limit came at Muirfield Village, his tournament, his course, his press conference. When a reporter asked about the future, Jack started diplomatic. But then the filter broke. What came out of Jack Nicklaus's mouth left the room frozen. He didn't just criticize the schedule, he dismantled it, piece by piece, tournament by tournament, in front of every major golf journalist. The PGA Tour is probably the healthiest it's ever been, he started. I think it's doing well. We've got a great group of players. That sounded safe. Then he pivoted. I mean, I hate to see tournaments bunched too much together, with too many big tournaments too close together. That's a problem, I think. And I think that's going to be a problem for the tour in the future. He paused, knowing he'd said too much. I probably shouldn't have brought it up here. I'll get chastised for that later. But he couldn't stop. He named names. If you looked at the schedule, we're involved in the Cognizant down in Florida. And, we have Pebble Beach and Los Angeles, Tiger's event, and then Cognizant, and then we had Bay Hill and the Players. I mean, what chance does that tournament have? It sits right in the middle of those. They don't have a chance. With that, Jack had done the unthinkable. He'd taken a knife to Rolapp's entire strategy, in front of everyone, on his own course, without a single note, and Rolapp heard every word. The room went silent. Journalists looked at each other. Cameras kept rolling. And somewhere in the back, Brian Rolapp heard every single word. Now, imagine being Rolapp. You're the new CEO. You came from the NFL. You've negotiated billion-dollar deals. You have a 200-page strategy. And then the most respected voice in the sport, the man who built the tour, stands up and tells the world your plan is a disaster. He names specific tournaments. He explains exactly why they'll fail. He does it with the calm authority of someone who's been right about golf for 60 years. What do you say? How do you defend yourself? You don't. You can't. Anything you say either disrespects a legend or proves he's right. So you say nothing. You freeze. You smile. You wait for it to be over. You become, in that moment, completely speechless. And that silence said more than any words ever could. But it also opened the door for others to speak, and they were waiting in the wings. Rolapp didn't issue a statement. He didn't push back. He didn't defend his plan. He let the silence hang. And that silence said more than any words could. Jack had rendered the most powerful executive in the sport voiceless, not through anger, through undeniable truth, through the weight of 18 majors, through the legacy of a man who helped write the rules. But Jack's moment wasn't the end, it was the beginning, because once Jack spoke, others started speaking too, and their voices were just as loud. Dan Rappaport, one of the most respected golf journalists, knew exactly what Jack's comments meant. He said it would be a difficult conversation for Rolapp. Rolapp would have to tell Jack Nicklaus that the PGA Tour as you knew it is not what the PGA Tour of tomorrow is going to look like. The PGA Tour as you knew it, that's not a schedule change. That's a fundamental transformation. Rolapp was erasing the weekly grind, the regional events, the sense that any player could compete and win, the vision Jack built, and Rolapp was tearing it down. But Rappaport wasn't the only one. Eamon Lynch called out the USGA by name, and players like Mike Weir and Scottie Scheffler added their own weight to the avalanche. Eamon Lynch went further. He called out the USGA by name. Their silence made them complicit. He even suggested future majors should be stripped from New York venues, a radical statement showing how far the conversation had moved. Then came the players. Mike Weir said he'd never seen an American player on American soil treated the way Nicklaus was treated, not as an attacker, but as a truth teller. The crowd cheered his honesty. They understood he was fighting for them, for the game, for everything that made golf special. Scottie Scheffler, the world number one, weighed in carefully. He said being in the arena isn't for everybody. Jack showed something real. Coming from the world number one, that carried weight. Jack wasn't just a nostalgic voice. He still had the power to change the conversation. And here's where it gets more interesting. The USGA said nothing, the tour said nothing, and that silence was becoming the loudest noise in the room. The longer they stayed quiet, the more questions piled up. Why wasn't Rolapp defending his plan? Why wasn't he explaining the two-track system's benefits? Because he couldn't. Jack had exposed the flaws. The plan was indefensible. The only move was to wait and hope people forgot. But people weren't forgetting. The golf world was talking, and getting louder. Jack had given them permission to question the leadership, to be skeptical of the suits, to be angry. That anger started to spread. Fans, players, sponsors all felt the pressure, and the private meeting Jack requested hadn't even happened yet. Fans were furious about abandoned tradition. Players were furious the rank and file were ignored. Sponsors were furious their events were devalued. The entire ecosystem was under pressure from Jack Nicklaus, standing on his own course, refusing to back down. The private meeting hasn't happened yet. Jack wants to sit down with Rolapp and Jay Monahan. He wants a conversation, but everyone knows what that will be. Jack won't ask permission. He'll tell Rolapp his plan is broken, that the tour he's trying to build isn't the tour Jack helped create. Rolapp has three choices: ignore Jack and lose moral authority, bend to Jack and admit failure, or find a middle ground that keeps the tour moving without tearing it apart. He can ignore Jack and risk losing the moral authority of the sport. He can bend and admit his plan was wrong, or he can find a middle ground. But the middle ground is shrinking. The longer he waits, the less room there is to maneuver. What happens if Jack wins? The schedule goes back. The two-track system is abandoned. The tour might lose money, broadcasters might pay less, but the soul of the sport is preserved. The weekly tournaments still matter. The grinders still have a chance. The tradition lives on. What if Rolapp wins? He pushes forward. The 2027 schedule stays compressed. The two-track system becomes permanent. The tour makes more money. Stars play each other more often. But at what cost? Middle-tier events disappear. Rank-and-file players are squeezed out. The tour becomes a closed club for the elite few. That's the choice. That's the battle. And Jack Nicklaus has drawn the line. He's planted his flag at Muirfield Village and said, "This far. No further. The trophy stays on the schedule. The questions stay in the air. The silence from the USGA and the tour leadership is the loudest noise in the room. Everyone is waiting for the next move." Jack has spoken. The golf world has heard him. Now it's up to Rolapp and Monahan to decide. They can ignore the legend. They can hope the controversy fades. But golf is built on memory. And the memory of Jack Nicklaus standing at Muirfield Village, naming the tournaments, exposing the plan, will last a long time. Jack didn't just leave Rolapp speechless. He left the entire leadership speechless. He forced them to confront the truth. The game is bigger than money, Bigger than ratings, bigger than any one executive's vision. Now the question hangs over professional golf like a storm cloud. Who is really in charge? The suits with the spreadsheets? Or the legends who built this sport with their own hands? The meeting hasn't happened yet. The decision hasn't been made. But one thing is certain. Jack Nicklaus will not back down. He never has. He never will. This story is far from over. When that closed-door meeting ends, I'll be back with the fallout. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it. And tell me in the comments, who has more to lose, Jack or the CEO?